Hi, Lee. Welcome to our show.
Hello, Savannah. Welcome to the dog days of summer.
The dog days of summer. It is so hot.
It is hot.
I went on a walk at 8 o'clock this morning with my friend.
It was probably like upper 80s
It was 83, but the feel-like temperature was 90.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Even in the shade.
Yes.
Crushing.
Yeah.
Lee, what's going on? What's the latest?
Life is full. Lots going on.
Any drama?
No drama. Well, there's a little drama.
I feel that there's
I was
drama.
getting ready to go out of the country and I realized I had lost my passport like 4 days before I'm supposed to fly. So that was dramatic.
So much drama.
Rushed to Atlanta to get a replacement passport. And I must say, I was as impressed with the office of the passport agency in Atlanta of any bureaucratic office I've visited maybe ever in my life.
So efficient.
Yes, it was incredible.
Yeah.
I was supposed to show up 7:45. I had to check in with 5 people, and I was out of there 20 minutes from the time I got there.
Amazing.
And then they texted me a little bit later and gave me a passport.
How many other people were there?
Not a huge crowd. They were just very rigid about when you could show up, who you were going to see, what you were going to do.
So you can't walk in. You have to have an appointment.
You have to have an appointment.
And was it difficult to get an appointment?
No. I mean, there were quite a few steps for security reasons, but no, it was not too difficult.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that leads to the fun of going to the UK to do a bunch of interviews for No Small Endeavor with a bunch of really smart people that I'm a little intimidated by at least 2 of them because they seem like really big-brained people.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be great fun.
Is there anyone in particular you're really excited about?
I'm really excited about just about everybody we're talking to. I'm really intrigued with this guy named Ian McGilchrist, who wrote a somewhat famous book in academic circles called The Master and His Emissary.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually kind of the reason probably that we're going to the UK because Kate, one of our producers, had reached out to him about booking an interview. And his assistant said, well, do you want to do that remotely or do you want to do that here on the Isle of Skye? And so I told Kate, well,
the Isle of
where
Skye?
the heck do you think we want to do it?
So are you guys going to bring like video out and stuff to do the interviews?
Yeah. Sophie and Mary Evelyn are going with us. And so they're going to be taping and videoing and all that stuff. So,
it's going to be the best
yeah,
time.
I'm excited about it.
I hope that the weather is nice too.
Me too. So.
Because, the air conditioning situation sometimes can be spotty.
Yeah, that's right. How's life with you?
Life is great. I was telling you on the way in, we are currently recording on a Friday. Our normal routine is to record on Mondays, and I'm glad that we're normally on Mondays.
You're a little fresher on Monday than Friday?
I'm much fresher on Mondays because the weekends, chill vibes.
Yeah.
But this week specifically, it was just really slammed. I had a writing camp for, do you know the band Run Collective?
Sure.
Yeah, they're like this Irish Christian band, and they had a writing camp this week that I got to go to. So what that means is basically there are like multiple writes every day for the same band, and you're kind of like mixing up who you're writing with. And plus I had other things that I was doing, and so it's like a lot of like intense mental energy going towards creative output. But it ended up being so magical and fun.
Oh, good.
And I taught a mahjong class last night with my sister and my mom.
Exciting.
At your stomping grounds.
How about that?
Your church.
How about that?
So lots of fun things going on. Oh my gosh. And this was a very busy week. Monday, I had a birthday party where my friend brought in a sommelier and we did a wine tasting. So I don't drink, but I just took like sips. I don't drink for any ethical or moral reasons. It's because my stomach hurts when I drink.
Ah.
So I just took like sips and I knew I would be fine. But she told us a fascinating fact that I will share with you. She was like, if you ever want the best bang for your buck for good wine, look for an Austrian wine. Because she said that like in the 70s, they had this crazy mix up where antifreeze was mixed in with their wine. And nobody died from this, but basically Austria got this huge negative connotation for their wine industry because of this mix-up where antifreeze was mixed in with their wine.
Yeah.
That was distributed. And ever since then, they've basically been like going above and beyond to create like the best quality wine, but they still can't charge that much for it.
So it's good wine that you can get for cheap.
Amazing wine for much cheaper.
That's great.
Look for Austria.
That's a great tip. I'll definitely remember that one.
I thought so too.
Yeah.
Which I know you drink. You don't drink. Do you drink wine?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
Wine and beer.
I guess I've only ever seen you drink beer, so I didn't know what your palate was.
Yeah, it just depends upon the setting and the context.
And the context.
And the mood.
Well, Lee, I have one review I want to read from Ian Johnson. He said, "Hi, Lee and Savannah. I was wondering if you could talk about Christians who are dogmatic or fundamentalist in the sense that they see their camp of believers as being the only way, i.e. Southern Baptists, Catholics, liberal, or conservative Christians. How do you practice ecumenicalism?" I said that right? Ecumenicalism. I guess I've never heard it as an ism.
I think usually it's done as ecumenism, but yeah.
Ecumenism is what it's normally done?
I think so.
Well, this is ecumenicalism, and honestly, why not?
Yeah.
I have to imagine a Christian community's reputation in their community is hindered by their inability to dwell and love one another, let alone non-believers. Mm-hmm. What are your takes on that?
Let's see. Let me hit that quickly. One, I grew up with a lot of that. So I have thought long and hard about learning to navigate those sorts of things and extricate myself from that on that particular way of thinking. And it was a long, arduous process.
Are you saying that you grew up with a lot of like the tribalism piece, or that you grew up being shown why being ecumenical?
With the tribalism piece, that we were the only ones going to heaven.
Yeah.
The Southern Baptists didn't have a chance.
They didn't.
They were going to hell.
They were going
along with the Catholics. Yes. But we were
But
going
you guys had it right?
We had it right.
Yes.
That's right. Yes. So I think that it was a long, arduous process of learning a bit of intellectual humility, of learning the complexity of reading texts and the humility before texts and so forth and so on. So loads that can be said about that. But I think for me, it was just life experience of saying, oh, things are not as simple or simplistic as the preachers told us. And there's much more interesting ways to think about all of this stuff. And then second, I would note that I think that among all groups, like even among my tradition in Churches of Christ, it always depended on which part of the tradition you were looking at as to whether or not you got that kind of stuff. Like, so in the 19th century, our movement was very ecumenical. It arose as an ecumenical movement. We're not the only Christians. We're Christians only and seeking to break down the division among Christians. Unfortunately, by the time you get 75, 80 years into the movement, especially 100 years into the movement, it had burst 3 new denominations on the scene. And so it's even beginning with ecumenism, if you don't watch it, can even yield to its own kind of new sectarianism, which is a really interesting move. And then I would say last that you can see that kind of differences in tradition, like this person mentioned the Catholics. I mean, you have certain Catholics who are very sectarian, and then you have Catholics that are by no means sectarian and very broad-minded and ecumenical. And so, again, it just depends upon where one is in a given tradition, I think.
So for you, with this splintering into 3 different traditions, are you saying 3 different COC traditions came from that, or 3 different totally separate
3 different
traditions?
denominations.
Really?
Yeah, Churches of Christ, the Christian Church, and Disciples of Christ.
Disciples of Christ came from?
The Stone Campbell movement.
The Stone Campbell movement.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so for you, were you just saying by that I'm not going to say this right, but too broad of a view around this could also lead to its own denominationalism, where it's like multiple denominations can come out if you don't have some sense of identity?
Or more, I think I would say that it illustrates the complexity of good-hearted desire to have unity, and that it just gets complicated really quickly, right? Because you say, okay, well, what are we going to unify around? And somebody can say X, Y, and Z. Well, they say, well, when you say X, do you mean X
this?
prime, X2, X3?
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you're often arguing, and you can't stand to be with each other, and which is what happened in our movement. So we all, the reason people stake out certain doctrinal positions with such vehemence has a history to it, and the history is important, I think, to identify if you're not going to get caught up in some sort of narrow sectarian vision around certain doctrines. Like, for example, in Churches of Christ, of course, we're famously a cappella, right? or at least historically have been. These days, increasingly, a lot of churches of Christ are not a cappella. But that was seen as like a salvation issue in the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah.
You can go to hell for using a piano in worship. If you look at that historically, it's really interesting to think about that what happened in the Stone Campbell movement prior to the Civil War is that we were one of maybe the only denomination in the U.S. that did not split prior to the Civil War over the issue of slavery. And whereas the Baptists split, the Methodists split, you have all these major traditions that are splitting over the issue of slavery. Churches of Christ and Christian churches, they don't. They stay together. But what happens after the war is that there's a lot of condescension and ill will between the northern churches and the southern churches. And the southern churches are just dirt poor and can hardly feed their families, whereas the northern churches are wealthy and building big church buildings, and watch this, putting in big old organs in their churches, right? And so the organ and the big church begins to be a sign of you don't care about us, you don't love us, you're looking down on us, and then you slip in these kind of biblical justifications and biblical rationale for saying, well, this is the reason we don't do it, rather than saying, oh, no, it's really an issue about, it's really a social history question. But in time, nobody even remembers that story. What they remember is the way you read Ephesians 5 about singing and making melody in your heart unto the Lord.
Right.
But it's important, I think, to try to identify, why have we staked out things that we say, this is the only way, and if you don't see it this way, then you can't possibly be a person of goodwill or good faith. And I think sometimes doing that historical work helps us in our possibilities for ecumenical engagement.
Ecumenical engagement. I love that. Lee, that's great. Yeah, I remember the first time I learned that about the COC's history with no instruments and realizing a lot of it had to do with like poverty and access and then also comparison with northern COCs. And that was always very interesting.
So you did learn that from somebody.
I did learn that from somebody, and I'm trying to figure, I can't remember at the moment who.
Yeah.
Because the only Church of Christ I've ever been to was in college, and they allowed instruments. So I never knew it was a big deal until I like learned more about the tradition. Yeah. Yeah. But very fascinating. Ian, great question.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. If anyone else has any questions, literally you know where to find us. Just DM us, and I'll try to keep some of them to the minimal, because even with this one, we kind of went off on a tangent, didn't we? The next episode, I'm not going to read a single review. On that note, let's start the show. Welcome to the Subtext, where we go beneath the headlines and beyond the obvious. I'm Savannah Locke.
I'm Lee Camp.
Hey, if you like the show, here's your official permission to let us know about that. Follow, rate, and drop a review wherever you're listening. You can give us 5 stars if you're feeling generous, and we might even read it on the show. You can watch full episodes on YouTube and Spotify, and stay connected on Instagram at The Subtext Show, Savannah_Locke, and Lee C. Camp. If you have thoughts or questions or hot takes, just send them our way in the DMs. Lee, today we are talking about one of the biggest movies that has premiered in recent history.
Indeed.
The Odyssey. I almost feel that you might have seen it before me.
I think I did. I saw it a few days after it came out. I'm cutting edge, Savannah. I'm pop culture cutting edge.
So you must have gotten your tickets early.
I don't know. One of the boys got it. Yeah.
They were forward thinking.
Yeah.
Because it was hard to get tickets.
But you went to see it on the big screen.
I did.
Yeah. On the
big
IMAX screen. No, I didn't.
Okay. Yeah. So probably easier for you.
I've heard from somebody was telling me this weekend that it's definitely worth going and seeing it again on the big screen. Of course, I couldn't compare it seeing it on the little screen to the big screen, but yeah, that sounds like that would be fascinating.
It was so magical. The best advice that I got was from the internet, where they said to bring earplugs.
Oh, really?
And I did.
Huh.
And it really helped because it was very loud in the IMAX. I don't know if it felt that way to you and your
not overly so.
Tiny little screen that you suffered with. But for me, the earplugs were a good pro tip. So before we talk about the actual movie, I want to divide this into 2 parts. The first being the cultural currents below the Odyssey.
Okay.
So I want to talk about what people were saying about it before we talk about it itself.
Okay.
And oh my gosh, I guess I'm just talking about Elon Musk 24/7 lately, but
maybe you're paying too much attention to Elon.
The thing is, I don't even have Twitter. I don't know how I see these things, but the
algorithm knows you.
The algorithm knows me.
Yeah, it knows you're talking about Elon.
But this is what happened. I have downloaded an app called Brain Rot that has, you're going to love this. I have spent less than 10 minutes on socials every day for like the last 6 weeks. So like I have not been on socials at all really. So it's actually made writing these episodes like kind of challenging.
Can I give a quick parenthetical testimony?
Please do.
I found myself spending way too much time on Instagram on my computer.
Yeah.
And so I finally just put a thing on there, and I can't get to it until I like stay up till 1 a.m. or whatever, Monday to Friday, which I don't.
Yeah.
And my life has been so much more calm.
Yes. So I don't know where these things have been coming from is the point. But Elon Musk, before the movie even came out, basically said that he hates the Odyssey, right? So this movie had not come out yet and he's raging against it. He said that Nolan desecrated the Odyssey in order to win an Academy Award. And he basically blamed Christopher Nolan for pandering to like woke culture by hiring Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy and Elliot Page as Sinon. Is that what the character's name was? The one who like went to hell or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So then Elon basically says, I'm going to make an entire AI version through Grok that's more historically accurate and like releases like a 1-minute video. It was just so silly. And then he goes, never mind, I'm going to give Mel Gibson $100 million to make his own version of the Odyssey. So this man is just raging, right? And actually a friend of mine was like, didn't you see all the drama? Because I was like, I'm so excited about seeing the Odyssey. My friend said, didn't you see all the drama about it? And I was like, no, I haven't been on socials. Like, what's going on? And they showed me on the Odyssey's YouTube trailer. After Elon posted this, hundreds, if not like thousands or tens of thousands of people went in and disliked the trailer on purpose to review bomb it. And basically were commenting like, woke culture, Nolan is desecrating the Odyssey. This is a shame kind of thing. So I think that this was kind of like this culture war thing going into it. But then it got me thinking where Elon was like, he's not being historically accurate about this poem, which feels kind of loaded. And I wondered if you had thoughts about that.
That's so curious to me because I think that it's almost like it parallels theological arguments, right?
So much, yes.
Yeah. And what does it mean for to read an ancient text with historical accuracy? Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that there's a lot of naivete around all this because, and I find myself saying this oftentimes in church context, was like when people say, I just want to know what the Bible says. Mm-hmm. No, that's not what they want, right? Because I got so tired of hearing this one time at church that I said, okay, you want to know what 1 Timothy 2 says? I'll show you what it says. Mm-hmm. And I put up the Greek text of 1 Timothy 2, right? If you do John 1, right? NRK, ein he logos, kai ho logos, ein proston theon. No one, that's not what they want to hear. No. But that's the original language. Yeah. But even if you go like to the gospel accounts, even the gospel writers are not quoting the words Jesus spoke. Yeah. Jesus didn't, as far as we know, didn't use Greek in his teaching. He used most likely Aramaic, right? Yeah. And that's not even in the New Testament. And so that points to the fact that even in the New Testament, you're doing interpretive work and you're always translating. And translation itself is a creative move to try to take some words spoken in one historical context to give them some sort of meaning in a new context. And even the translators themselves know that they have a great variety and an array of different approaches to how you're going to do that, right? And so it's just, let's be historically accurate is a much too simplistic, even naive assertion, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm happy that you drew to the theological parallel too, because one of the things that they really hammer down in seminary, all translation is interpretation.
Right.
So every translation you ever read is all interpretation. And that really does resonate with this. Something that I was reading an article from Vanity Fair about this. And they said if Musk really wanted to make a historically accurate version of the Odyssey, he'd film a guy named Homer wearing a robe and reciting a poem around a fire for hours upon hours. But even that version might not cut the mustard when it comes to historical accuracy. There's a vibrant scholarly debate as to whether Homer was a single person or many people. Thus, Musk's promise to stay true to the art of Homer is not as simple as he or his followers would like to believe.
Right, yeah. And you even have that same sort of argument within the biblical tradition, right? Because people will say, in the so-called JEDP hypothesis about Old Testament, source text theory and all that kind of stuff, is that one? Did Moses really write all this, or was this a whole bunch of different people that took shape over time and so forth and so on? So it's just always complicated, and it doesn't help us to say, well, let's just give us what's most historical. Now, that doesn't mean that there are better and worse readings of a text, and that there are better and worse translations and better and worse depictions of what we would call the meaning of a text, the best we can get to it in our own day and age.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's something that the most famous modern translation of the Odyssey was done actually by a woman. So I think it might actually be the first translation that's been done by a woman. That's like very popular as of late, especially. And her name is Emily Wilson, and she was very critical of Nolan's take, even though Christopher Nolan said that her translation was the one that he read to make his own script, which is so interesting. But basically, I read through her entire critique, and she says, quote, "It's a family-friendly audio-visual spectacle, like an elaborate 4th of July fireworks display, and with about the same level of narrative and emotional depth." So savage. It's amazing. But I was also putting myself in her shoes, and I'm like, this would probably be like a biblical translator seeing someone on TikTok interpret a text that they've spent their whole life getting to know, where you're going to be more naturally protective of that.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyways, Emily Wilson's core complaint was that Christopher Nolan's Odysseus lacked the complicated, wily, and artful quality that made her translation famous in the first place, which was the very quality that Nolan publicly said drew him to her work. So the thing that I think that he found compelling in her work from her perspective was missing in his.
That's really interesting to me. I don't know Homer's work, and I don't know her work. Other than, of Homer's work, what you just pick. I don't know that I've ever read it, any translation, but, you obviously pick stuff up just paying attention over time. But it's interesting that she would say that, because I think that for me, watching Nolan's film, I got a much more complex picture of this character, Odysseus, than I imagined that I would, right? And so maybe she's locating the complexity more in his ongoing character. Maybe he's troubled all along, and he's just torn within himself and grappling all the way through. And apparently Nolan does leave out some of the, moral compromises because I think in Nolan's film, right, you're sitting there wondering, does he sleep with Charlize Theron's character? Because there's definitely some chemistry there, right? Yeah. But you're left presuming he doesn't. Yeah. But apparently he did in Homer's story, right? And so there's some cleaning up, apparently, that's going on there. I guess that's what her family-friendly thing is about. And so there's clearly that. But the complexity of Odysseus in Nolan's telling, as I saw it, was that he realizes that his supposed heroic stature is actually built on a stack of lies. And it's almost like a sin and redemption story, right? Where he's trying to come back to redemption and trying to find some sort of way back home that we'll put in scare quotes. But even when he gets home, it ends in this horrible sort of slaughter, right? That there's no cleaning up. I don't think Chris Nolan cleans that up for us, right? You're left with this, oh my Lord, why in the world? Couldn't he find a better way couldn't Odysseus have found a better way to deal with this than that, right? So you're still left with a deeply compromised, deeply troubling character. Maybe not as deeply troubling as
Emily Wilson.
Emily Wilson would have had him, but he's definitely deeply compromised.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to talk about that ending, because I don't know if it's true or not to the thing. I did read the Odyssey and the Iliad in 9th grade. So that is my latest interaction with it, and I don't remember much. My favorite book actually that I read in 9th grade, it was an AP English class, by the way, the only AP I ever took, was Till We Have Faces. Do you remember that?
C.S. Lewis?
So good.
I've never read that one.
That was my main takeaway from that whole year's reading. I don't think that this book grabbed me.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's worth noting that maybe Nolan thought that he was being truer to even Emily Wilson's interpretation than maybe he achieved in her mind, but also that people who are experts in fields sometimes have a hard time letting loose with lay people's ideas of things.
Yeah.
And that's part of being an academic.
It is part of being an academic because you get ticked off because people miss the nuance that as you said a moment ago, the nuance you've spent so many years trying to be facile with, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then somebody comes along and becomes world famous with their newest thing, and you're thinking, oh my Lord, they've spent a year studying this, and now look at what they've done, right?
Like, have they even read it all the way through?
Right.
She even said that at one point in her review, like, I'm not even convinced he finished this book.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah. And who knows if he did or not. But I mean, clearly, I would guess he did. Yeah. But in any case, it's also kind of like, here I'll, indict us academics. It's like, really? I mean, do you really expect a Hollywood filmmaker to be true to the kind of academic nuances of reading this text? We don't expect that with hardly any other stories, right?
Yeah.
You can take some good novel and make a movie out of it. You're not going to be ticked off because it's not the same thing as the book, because they're not doing the book.
Yeah.
They're doing a story, and they have their own agenda for what they're going to do in the story. So I don't fault Christopher Nolan for having his own agenda that he's trying to do in a film. That's what filmmakers always do.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely more relaxed in this area, but I would say, while not limited to academics, I think I have a lot of empathy for the academic piece where it's like, once again, you've invested your life to understand what's going on.
For sure, I do too.
But I do think that there is a sense in which it's like, this was meant to be a 4th of July fireworks display.
Yeah.
And I think that there is some really deep stuff that we can go into, but it was just visually stunning as well.
Yeah.
And intense and cinematic in a way that probably the Odyssey would have been perhaps more complicated or messy or nuanced.
Well, I think another way to think about this is that we go back to the biblical interpretation conversation we were having a moment ago, right? Sometimes a cry for more historically accurate, we'll put that in scare quotes, readings, is wanting to nail down the one thing this text means, right?
Yeah.
And under the presumption that what you're trying to do is to protect the authority of Scripture, right? But it may be that that's not what these texts are supposed to do. And moreover, it's clear in both some significant streams in Jewish and Christian tradition both that a lot of interpreters have never suspected that that's what the Bible's supposed to do. And that the so-called polyvalency, that there can be lots of meanings of this. And moreover, you don't have to be threatened by it. You should celebrate it, that there can be a variety of meanings of these texts. And that all of these can glorify God and lead us to our own edification and formation and the kind of people that we're being called to be. Whereas the person who wants to nail down the one particular meaning in defense of the authority of Scripture, what they may be doing is a lot more interested in their own authority as opposed to the authority of Scripture, right? And why can't you just have a little bit of humility and say, maybe all this stuff's bigger than me and bigger than my one way. I'm going to make sure everybody sees it and celebrate the diversity of interpretations and so forth. And the Jews taught us a lot about that. And I always find that really compelling and really interesting. And so coming back to the Odyssey, of course, Emily Wilson's interpretation is going to be different than Christopher Nolan's. But isn't it fascinating that this, 2,800-year-old story...
That the story lives on.
That it lives on.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean that to say, well, Elon Musk's interpretation or comments on this is just as good as anybody else's, because what he seems to be wanting to do is to shut down the conversation, almost like the biblical fundamentalist literalist, right? Of saying, no, there's one way to think about this.
Yes.
But there are, between Emily Wilson and Christopher Nolan at least, they seem to be having really productive, fruitful conversations.
Yeah, agreed.
And all of us engaged in watching this film, it's asking us really hard questions.
Agreed.
That are worth us pondering for a long time, if not the rest of our lives.
Agreed.
Because it says some very powerful things.
It says so many powerful things. Yeah, one commenter put it perfectly, what you were just talking about. Quote, I loved Nolan's Odyssey. I loved Emily Wilson's critique of Nolan's Odyssey. I love that art has given us a direct rhetorical highway between 2026 and 700 BCE. is that the healthiest possible outcome of this whole saga, that the movie and the takedown both work as entry points into the same text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
that's like the healthiest. And I think that's what makes it so compelling and alive, similar to the Bible, of like that it stays in the conversation rather than being, this is the one way that it can ever be read, because it would have been dead at this point. Like the Bible would be dead if that's how we had to treat it at this point. No one would, no one would still be reading a part of Leviticus that says you cannot mix these two fabrics.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what it means. And that's all that you can do, with no way for us to interact with our own culture and our own time and understand what God might be saying in and through that,
Yeah, I think I may or may not have told this story before on the subtext, but in the last couple of years in our church context, we were having these very lively debates about one particular matter. And there were some who wanted to say, if you don't read it this way, then you're doing away with the authority of Scripture. And I got to telling this story about a friend of mine who's not a Christian, who was a very strong anti-death penalty advocate. And years ago, I had him come speak to one of my classes of undergrads and talking about his work. And when he was done, a student raised their hand and they said, "What do you think about Romans 13 and what it seems to say about the death penalty?" Mm-hmm. And my friend replied, "I don't think about what Romans 13 has to say about that. That text has no authority in my life."
Yeah.
And so what I was trying to say to my church context today was saying, look, if you're arguing about the meaning of a text, you are giving authority to the text, right? The very fact of arguing about it means you're giving it some sort of authority to speak into your life.
You're right.
So you don't have to presume that if you don't have this decision, this conclusion, that therefore you've thrown away the authority. I just don't buy it at all.
I agree. That's actually a really great way of looking at it. You've never told that story.
Oh, good.
That's a good one. Yeah. Which brings me to...
That's a good one among some of the other stories that you tell that are not so good.
I love all the stories you tell, Lee. Okay, this leads me to, since we're kind of on this like biblical literalism train. Okay, so there's this website called Answers in Genesis that I often find myself on. I don't know why, but they reviewed the Odyssey. And I would say this is a more fundamentalist website that basically you can ask like any question of the Bible and they have some sort of blurb on it, but they also do reviews of certain things, such as Odyssey. And I want to talk about their argument against the Odyssey. The opening argument is that the Odyssey does not respect the source material. It disrespects the original. And then the author drew an immediate parallel to the movie Noah, which I don't know if you remember that movie with Russell Crowe.
I didn't see it.
And how that showed disrespect for the Bible. So I remember very clearly when that movie came out, where people were very disturbed by how it had deviated from Noah and Genesis. So then he said, Nolan's treatment of the Odyssey felt like what it would be like if an atheist decided to make a movie about the Bible. There were many times where I was reminded of the blasphemous film Noah by Darren. I don't know how do you pronounce his last name, but the director, Darren. And I thought, first of all, it's very fascinating, much like us, that we're seeing parallels with people's engagement between the Odyssey and the Bible. But then second of all, that he almost seems to have taken it personally. Like, if you do this to the Odyssey, you can do it to the Bible with no excuse. So that parallel is very interesting to me too. So how does that all hit you, his review?
Is this the same review who also is upset about the way Athena gets treated? Will you talk about that?
Okay, yes.
Before I go?
His critique for Athena, who was played by Zendaya, was that Athena became a figment of Odysseus's imagination, in that it was more akin to a guilty conscience than an actual god or goddess. And so he was basically like, it's taking away the gods from this film and making it all psychological, which is, for him, desecrating the spiritual realm.
Yeah. Yeah, this is very, very fascinating. I would say on the first part about you're treating the story of Homer's story the way an atheist would treat the Bible, I suspect I don't have a whole lot more to say than what we've already said. It's like, look, you have to do the work of interpretation, and different people are going to interpret it in different ways, and that's just the way it is. So if you want to take your one particular way and say this is the only way to read it, then you're asserting your authority as opposed to the authority of Scripture. And so I think that kind of comment I would continue to say is crucial to say in response to something like that.
But then also, just to put a little there, like I have noticed that those people like aren't bothered, for example, by the fact that like all depictions of Jesus are like a very white European man with blue eyes and blonde hair.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Where it's like protective over certain elements, but like not so bothered by others.
Yes. And what you so rightfully point out is that the presumption that there's one ability to nail down one particular historical meaning of a text is ironically a modernist assumption, not an ancient one.
Right.
So he's wanting to say you're not honoring the ancient intent, but by saying it the way he's saying it, he is speaking a modernist conceit and a modernist presupposition, which is fascinating. But there's another kind of interesting modernist parallel in that when I read that particular review, I was struck by the fact that when I watched the film and you have Athena talking to Odysseus, I didn't think of it as psychologizing.
Yeah.
I thought of it as this is an on-screen depiction of however you might want to imagine a divine authority speaking to you. So in other words, I thought of it as somewhat parallel to how some Christians might think of the Holy Spirit speaking to them, right? However, this is one of the big questions, another one of the big questions of modernity, and that is, are we going to take some sort of notion of the divine and reduce it to a psychologized interiority, right? So great classical political liberalism, Rudolf Bultmann, for example, right? What he does is he demythologizes the stories of Scripture. And what he does is he says, we've got these myths and we're going to strip it of all its mysticism and make it, what's conceivable in our modern rational way of understanding the way things. And so what he concludes is our claims about the divine are not so much about the divine, they're about our interior experience. And so this reviewer is basically saying, I don't like that move. He's making it about interior experience. In other words, he's saying I'm not a Protestant liberal. But the Protestant liberal, just like this reviewer, they're both grappling with the constructs of modernity. And I guess I would want to say both of them are obscuring something that seems to be true. Namely that anytime any of us talk about the divine, believing that it's true, believing that there's some reality about the divine and about God, the only way we can say anything about it or believe anything about it is through our interior subjectivity, right? You can't separate those. It's not interior subjectivity psychologizing or God is real. It's always going to be both, right? And so I think that it raises a really interesting question to say, no, you don't have to have this dichotomy. It's in fact holding these together that seems to be truer to our human experience, even while believing that God is real.
Yeah, there's not a way to separate your belief in God from your own psychology.
Right.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah.
I also am happy that you said that you didn't interpret Zendaya's character as a figment of his imagination, because I also didn't, but I could see what he was saying, because you know how at the end, spoiler alert, I'm giving you a time to turn it off, at the end where you realize that she was killed in Troy. And I took that, though, to be like a huge overarching pointing to that idea of hospitality to strangers, like Zeus's law, where like in killing her, he killed the gods. And that's like how I was interpreting that, was this idea of like angels. What is it in the Bible? That angels might be strangers.
Yeah, that you have, this is Hebrews talking about the Abraham story.
Yeah.
Where like you have thereby entertained strangers, you have entertained angels unaware.
Yes, exactly. That like this idea of like anyone coming in could be an angel, and anyone coming in could be like one of the gods. And I took that to mean that Odysseus, in killing her, was killing one of the gods. And so that was kind of like my interpretation versus him just kind of psychologically being haunted by the ghost of this woman that he killed in Troy. But I mean, I have no idea what it was intended, but that was kind of like how I interpreted that. I will say too, did you take overall in the theme, and this will move us into the Odyssey itself. overall, did you feel that the interaction between Odysseus and his crew and the gods, was it all diminished or modernized? Like, I think a lot of people have been critiquing, basically saying that they're taking the divine parts out of it, and that basically Odysseus was the one in charge of things, and he was the one making all of these choices, and it wasn't really the gods punishing through storms or whatever, but it was just them basically giving divine gods, using divine gods to make sense of what was actually happening in reality.
Interesting.
That is a critique.
I mean, I'd have to go back and watch it again, but as I recollect, there's a sort of presumed acceptance of there are these gods at play,
Yes.
right? And you mess with them at your peril.
Yeah.
So that particular critique doesn't resonate with my memory of the movie.
Yeah, like with Poseidon.
Yeah.
And Cyclops, which, by the way, was that scene not so
That
good?
was pretty wild.
Okay, so in real life, I looked up how they made it. They had a 60-foot puppet
Really?
for Cyclops. Obviously, it was not as perfect as what we saw on the screen, but they used very limited additional effects. And so they had a 60-foot puppet that actually like towered over all of them.
That's pretty wild.
Which is very fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Okay, so going into the film itself, I'd love to hear just some takes. Give me your hottest take.
My hottest take, I think that, two big takeaways. One is that, or maybe three. One would be that, this is the most obvious moral takeaway, I think, from Christopher Nolan's telling, is that we break rules of hospitality and care for our neighbor, and the violence by which we do that most egregiously to our peril. And this is not, he doesn't, if we're going to use explicitly theological language, he has a thick understanding of the doctrine of sin, right? He's not moralizing about, oh, you shouldn't have lied. He's saying something that the doctrine of the fall and the doctrine of sin has always tried to say, and that is when we do these egregious acts of violence or oppression or brutality, we're ripping the fabric of human history. And it circles back around on all of us, the one committing it and those of us who didn't commit it, but it gets us all in its wake, and it's horrific. And the more we do it, the more destructive it is.
Yes.
So that's, I think that's one of the most powerful things of the film that's hard to get away from.
It felt to me very similar to Oppenheimer, like the moral of that story.
Yeah.
Which is like when we don't take into consideration the intended and unintended consequences of our actions, that we can cause irreparable damage.
Yeah.
And the toothpaste goes out of the like you cannot get it back in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I recently interviewed Malcolm Guite on his, Galahad and the Grail. And he was telling me that the way he got caught up in such fascination with all these famous Arthurian legends was because his mother would read him these stories. And in this one particular story, the so-called Third Fall, where the actions of one man, violent actions of one man, rips the fabric of society, right?
Yes.
And he was objecting to his mother as a young boy, saying that's not fair that his wicked acts could have such a ripple effect upon the whole kingdom and upon everybody and have such an extensive cost. And he said, his mother said, yeah, I'm reading you this story because so that you will realize you live in just such a world and that there are people who do such things and they can have such an egregious impact upon the whole of society and the whole of history. And so I thought that way the film was brilliant at that. Yeah.
Agreed. How did you feel about the ending with him coming back and just basically slaughtering everyone? So freaking dark.
Yeah, I wonder if is that maybe just a way to make the point all the more that we just said, you rip the fabric and even in your better days, you still end up reaping the fruit of having ripped the fabric, which also points to the way that you have this, again, very strong notion of, obviously not his language, but Christian language of the doctrine of sin, is that even the most beautiful reality. Like, so here, the practice of hospitality. It's precisely the practice of hospitality that Odysseus uses in a corrupt fashion that allows him to win the battle at Troy, right?
Yep.
And because he then uses that in such a he takes a good and uses it in such a perverse fashion, it means that from that point forward, who are you going to be suspicious of? People who give you gifts. What are you trying to get out of me? What are you trying to do to me, right? And it's like you fundamentally take away a genuine good that's been given that makes human concourse and human relationship and human ability possible, and you've ripped it, and it's going to keep coming back at you in ways you can't even imagine.
And it did?
And it did.
It did. It was so dark.
Yeah.
What did you feel about the idea of home? So obviously the whole thing is him trying to come home, right? There is kind of like a personal parallel, though, too, for him of not only did he have to do the long journey home and defeat all these big obstacles, but there were also internal obstacles that he had to figure it out of like what needed to change in him so that he could come home. And that, I don't know, it just kind of got me thinking about like, what does that mean to come home to yourself? What does it mean to have a homecoming, maybe at a physical place? And what do you have to say about that?
Definitely that gets complicated. I wonder, again, if it's, I mean, the way I've heard people talking about the Odyssey, I've always assumed that there's this sort of simplistic, you have to go through a lot of struggles to come home again.
Right.
But it seems that at least in Christopher Nolan's telling, there are lots of other kind of questions of like, well, you're not the same person coming home, and so you can't possibly come back to the same home. And your being away has profoundly impacted what home was. And maybe home never stays steady or solid anyway, and it's always changing day by day and season by season. So it just opens up a lot of interesting questions about what do we even mean by coming home or trying to find our way back home that maybe is more complicated than we presume a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I'm curious in the actual Odyssey, like the book, what happened between him and Charlie. Is it Calypso? Not Calypso.
Calypso with Charlize
Theron. Because I know that in that version they did have sex, but I don't know if he like lived with her. Like I don't know what happened there, because that to me felt a little ambiguous, where I'm like, what was the obstacle here other than regaining one's memory that you were losing because of a substance? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that felt to me like it was lacking.
Yeah. As far as storyline,
like what was happening there? Yeah.
Right.
I get from her perspective why she would want to keep him drugged, because she wanted someone, which is amazing. But I think that I was not clear on like, okay, what exactly was happening here that was forming him other than him being in a haze. Yeah. For 12 years or however long it was.
Maybe it was because it was Charlize Theron.
Maybe it was just Charlize Theron. Who, by the way, I loved the movie. I thought it was so good. I would go see it again. The only casting misstep for me was her, where she just has a modern face. She does. Everyone else, I could believe that they, only ate lamb for dinner. But that woman goes to Equinox. She does. And she does Pilates, and her face has seen an iPhone. And so she was the only one where I was like, I am pulled into a modern era with you.
I will leave that to you to comment on.
Okay, great. Yes, well, then that will be my comment. Any other last takeaways? Did you enjoy the film?
I did, yes. It was great.
Nice. Would you see it again on a bigger screen?
I would. I think I want to try to see it again on IMAX, assuming it's still on IMAX.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's still booked out until like September.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have plenty of time, Lee.
Excellent.
Okay, well, everyone, let us know your thoughts on the Odyssey. What did we miss? What do you disagree with?
Yes.
Particularly if you disagree with Lee.
I'm sure there will be plenty of disagreement with Lee.
Thanks for the convo, Lee.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Subtext.
Start a conversation with your friends, your favorite group chat, or even your enemies by sharing this episode with someone who might like to discuss it with you.
Want to become a part of the conversation? DM us, DM Savannah, email us your thoughts or topic ideas at info@nosmallendeavor.com.
Leave us a review wherever you're listening and leave us 5 stars. Follow us on socials at The Subtext Show, at Savannah_Locke, and at Lee C. Camp.
Very grateful to have you as a listener.
See you next Wednesday.